All right, so Jason from East Africa, you are a frontier missionary. You work with unreached people groups there. You're doing church planning, and you guys, I believe, have a wealth of knowledge about disciple making, something that I think, have maybe lost in the United States, where we kind of get stuck in the routine of going to church. We give some money. We might be a good tither, and maybe we do a Bible study where it's the same Bible study leader every semester, and that's kind of like the next level is to attend. So I want to hear from you, like how can we go from church going into a disciple making mindset? Where do we begin? I know this is a big question, but I want you to run with that. What are some ways that we can go from church going into disciple making?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of my response, I might sound like a broken record, sort of from the first session, and part of it might be new. I think in America, we're such a busy culture. We do so much, and I think, that's great, but I think there are some dangers in that. And I think in thinking about making, following the Great Commission to make disciples, I think the challenge, for Americans and maybe the American church is taking the time to slow down and really prioritize spending time with the Lord and growing in our relationship with Him. I think that's number one. I think if we're going to be a disciple maker, and if God is going to use us in that way, God's the one that moves and changes hearts, right? And so if we believe that, then He first has to pour into us so that we can pour into others. And so if it doesn't start with us spending extravagant time with Him, in His presence, getting to know Him, reading the Bible, I think any efforts to be part of a disciple-making movement here in America will be unfruitful. Second, I would say, again, taking time and prioritizing in our busy lives to slow down and really invest in community. I think community, at least in my experience, God radically transformed my life through Chi Alpha Campus Ministry at the University of Virginia. And that was really the first environment where I really got discipled personally. And yes, I was discipled by the campus pastor. We would meet up one-on-one, like once a week. But I was also discipled by this small group community that I was a part of. And being involved in this Christian community helped to shape me, helped to keep me accountable, helped make sure I was, like iron sharpening iron. And so being involved intentionally in community, I think, is a huge component of discipleship. And so the two things I would really say, like maybe where I would encourage the American church is to, slow down our busy schedules, to prioritize abiding and to prioritize, are we really investing in Christian community? More than just, a couple hours a week in a small group. Are we really doing life with other Christians in this Christian community that creates this environment where, we're kind of discipling others in this community? Now, of course, I'm not proposing that the Christian community is our only source of friends. Obviously, we need to be in the world, and God will obviously, use us to be a light to those in our workplace and whatnot. But we also need to have this community of Christians that we're doing life together that will, I think, be a huge, an essential part, really, of discipleship.
Yeah, oh, that's great. That's good. I'd like to hear a little bit, like myself included, and some of my friends and I, when we've shifted our mindset from attending and to trying to make disciples and doing some of those things that you mentioned, but discipleship is hard.
Yeah.
And this maybe more than the average person working in an unreached context. But what would you say to the person who has stepped out and they're trying to go from attending to disciple making, and it's just like this uphill battle. And maybe they try to lead a group,
Yeah.
and they had one sign up, or they didn't even get a sign up the first time. Like, speak to that person who is trying to go from attending to disciple making, and it just doesn't feel like it's working.
Oh man, I would say stay the course. Man, keep at it because it's worth it. I mean, this is God's commission to us to go and make disciples. And I feel like this is where when you jump into the stream where someone is pouring into you and you're pouring into others, you're jumping into that stream of God. Like that is where true life is found. And like my encouragement would be to stay with it. Like keep the foot on the gas, like stay the course. I would also say, and this kind of came to mind as you were talking, is like um, obviously it's important to be in a place where you're being discipled by someone and you are discipling others. And I think that's important that everybody sort of have both ends on that spectrum. But when you're thinking about making disciples or like leading a small group, I do feel like there's some like intimidation there. People are like, I can't lead a group. Like, who am I? Like, I don't have the time. Like, I'm not smart enough. And I'll just say, like, coming from, working in an unreached people group context, I think going into it, I felt like I needed to be the source of all the answers. Whenever anybody had any questions, and they had some hard questions, especially coming from an Islamic perspective that I didn't fully understand. But I feel like over time, I came to understand, like, I don't really need to be the source of answers. I really just need to be a guide pointing them to the scriptures and pointing them to Jesus. And so, like, that kind of released a lot of the pressure off me. Is like, I don't need to have all the answers, but I can say, hey, well, let's read through the book of John and we'll come back and talk about it later. Or like, pointing people to the scriptures that, like, they're not in this relationship to follow me. They're in this relationship to follow Jesus. And so like, right. I'm pointing them to God. And as I do that, that takes some of the burden off my shoulders.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I think one of the number one things I've heard recently, as I've asked people, like, what is the obstacle that keeps them from trying to make disciples, is they just feel like they don't know enough. Or they don't have enough scripture memorized, or, they wouldn't know how to answer some questions. And, I haven't had a chance to reply to all the people that have shared with me, but it's like, welcome to my world.
Right. Exactly.
Like there's so much I don't know. And I realized a while back, like, if I wait to know it all, like, I mean, I'm going to be 70 years old and still waiting. Like, it's just, you invite people along and, ask them questions, and the questions that come up, you don't know, like say like, hey, you know what? That's a good one. Let me go ask somebody that I think knows a lot more than I do, and and that's okay. And it teaches also, like, if we're always waiting to know more until we feel ready, then people are always waiting, and then they're going to start thinking the same mentality too. So like at the end of the day, we're just making this perpetual wheel of saying that people need to have X amount of education before they can, point people to Jesus. And that's just not the movement that Jesus Christ started with his disciples and how he got here today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, like, I mean, a lot of discipleship some of it is formal, like structured, where you're meeting together and you're intentionally talking through something, a topic, studying together. But a lot of discipleship is informal. It's just doing life. Jesus' call to his disciples was like, to follow me, right? To come and see. And I feel like the disciples learned a lot probably in Jesus's teachings and what he said to them. But I would bet money that they probably learned more just by observing him, how he did life and how he did ministry. And so, like, a huge chunk of discipleship, it's not just what study are you going to bring to your small group and what are you going to say that's going to sort of encourage them along in their spiritual journey. But like, part of discipleship is just doing the potluck together. And like, as you're talking and being together, like, the way you live life and the way you treat your spouse and your kids and the decisions you make. And as you're doing that together, like you're iron sharpening iron.
Yeah, no, that's so good. All right, so I'm going to ask you one more question, but it's going to be on our next video. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what does this developing your relationship with God look like for you? And you mentioned it was integral, right? Like this abiding piece and being on the field, and even here in the States, if we're going to make disciples. And so cultivating a relationship with Jesus, I'm curious to hear from you as a missionary in an unreached context that is hard. You're isolated, you're lonely, there's spiritual warfare. I think that you have a lot to offer. So let's jump into this next video and hear what you have to say there.